Slava Isusu Christu. We continue our series on a Modern Day Martyr on the life of Blessed Vasyl Velychkovsky. Today I'd like to share the story of the transfer of his holy relics. I recall in early January of 2001, Bishop Michael Hrinchishin was here for Christmas in Winnipeg, and he preached in our parish, and as he was preaching, he announced that Blessed Vasyl would be part of the group that was going to be beatified by Pope John Paul II. And he said very clearly in church that his holy body is resting in All Saints Cemetery north of Winnipeg, but it behooves that his holy relics be brought to a church and to be brought here to St. Joseph's Church. And I was then the provincial of the Yorkton province of the Ukrainian Redemptorists in Canada and United States. So began the process of beginning of the transfer. First of all was to prepare the space. We had two spaces that were roofs of the basement, but not yet, and nothing built above it. And so we decided, the pastor and myself decided that we would build a shrine, a chapel, and a museum, which we're in right now, the museum we're in right now, in honor of Blessed Vasyl. We got permission from the Metropolitan Michael Bisdell, to transfer his relics here to Winnipeg. But the work could not really begin first until he was beatified on June 27, 2001 in Lviv by St. John Paul II. And after that fall, we began to work earnestly on building these rooms and preparing this room, so that in the spring of 2002, we were completing these rooms. Didn't finish them until that summer. We began to prepare for the actual transfer of relics. We needed all kind of permissions from the government of Manitoba, from Winnipeg, to exhume a body. That was a government affair. We needed permission from the family that was, thank God, was still living. He had a cousin here in Winnipeg, Mrs. Maria Matvichuk, who was his first cousin, who lived in Winnipeg, and when Blessed Vasyl came to Canada, he visited with them, stayed with them a little while. Her husband was a doctor, looked after him. So she was really still living and was able to get permission to have his body exhumed. Secondly, we needed the protocol from Rome. What do you do with a blessed? And of course, a whole list came of what you must do, that those at the cemetery had to be appointed by the bishop, by the Metropolitan Michael Bisdell. Couldn't be just anyone there. And he appointed around 33 people, including himself, of course, Bishop Michael Hrinchishin, a number of priests, Redemptorists, and a number of laity, doctors that were going to be involved, and the grave diggers, the funeral home. All those people had to be appointed by letter by the Metropolitan, and including some witnesses, 2 witnesses, that this is where he is actually buried. And we had, for witnesses, Mrs. Maria Matvichuk, who was his relative, and who visited the grave many times in those years after his death, and Right Reverend Mitrat Michael Boyachuk, the late Michael Boyachuk. He was a pallbearer for the funeral, so he too was one of the witnesses. In preparation for this day, Rome also asked that whatever is found, whatever is exhumed from the ground, has to be placed in they call it a zinc container, a non-corrosive container, like a stainless steel container that would not rust. And so zinc was hard to come by and get built, and so we chose to build a stainless steel container. Well, the question came, what size should we build it? Should we make it? I went to the chief medical examiner, Dr. Belisandra. He was the chief medical examiner here in Manitoba, dealing especially with cadavers that they would find perhaps in the forest. And upon questioning him and asking him what size, he says, well, since he was in a buried in a metal coffin, we can expect a skeleton, an intact skeleton. Perhaps some dried skin on it. So make it his size. Since you can't bend the bones, break the bones, I just leave him as a skeleton. And so I began to look at pictures. Although I had met him, my memory wasn't that great. He wasn't a tall man. By pictures, I assumed he was around 5'8". So I was 68 inches tall. So I made the container 68 inches. And I was going to make it around 20 inches wide. Dr. Vasyl said a little bit wider. So I said 21. I said, okay, 21. So that had to be prepared beforehand. That container had to be wrapped in unbroken silk ribbon. Why silk? Because silk does not decay. It will last thousands of years. Well, try to find silk ribbon. I had to find it directly from Japan, where they make a lot of silk. And then this container had to be placed in a wooden container. And here I made a wooden container, but I covered it with metal, as it is right now. And I broke one of the rules. I made a glass top to it so that people could see the stainless steel container. So came time for the transfer of the relics. The chapel was ready. The containers were ready. The museum was mostly ready. And came time, and we had decided September 16th to the 22nd we would do all this protocol. Everything had to be recorded. We had a recorder. We had a videographer and film taking pictures also. And so we gathered on Monday, September 16th at the All Saints Cemetery early in the morning, around 8 o'clock in the morning. And we began the exhumation, the digging, and the bringing of the coffin up. And it was wet in the grave, as All Saints is known for its wetness. So the coffin was filled with mud, and water had leaked into the coffin, and all those things were there. But we didn't know all that. We just saw the mud on the coffin. We brought the coffin up. All of us were there. We were praying as this whole thing was taking place. And then we cleaned the coffin with a rag. Deacon Kanish had cleaned that coffin. Now later on, that he said, because he carried that cloth in his car, a few months later he had a major car accident, and someone hit him in the driver's side. And he said, nothing happened to me. And he acclaimed that he had this holy relic, the cloth that cleaned Blessed Vasyl's coffin, and that it was that cloth that saved him from any danger or rather disaster during that car. The car was destroyed, the windows were destroyed. He said, nothing happened to me, nothing, not even a scratch. After the coffin was raised, we loaded it into the Kropo hearse and brought it to St. Boniface Hospital, where the medical examiners were to examine whatever was in the coffin. So we left Father Larry Condra to be on guard over this coffin that was in an autopsy room in St. Boniface Hospital. The rest of us went for lunch, came back from lunch, and we prayed the Akathist hymn together. We sang the hymn, and after the hymn, we opened the coffin. Slava Iesusu Christu. Glory be to Jesus Christ.